Before we start the video, just a quick heads up. This is part 9 in a series I'm doing covering the Super Monkey Ball franchise. As such, I'll be making some comparisons to previous games in order to fully explain my opinions. With that being said though, hey there, I'm Kardino, and welcome back to Fallout, a Super Monkey Ball retrospective. Whatever may be said about Sega, there is one thing you cannot deny. They are no strangers to experimentation. Especially with the Monkey Ball series, they showed significant tenacity in finding ways to innovate, whether it be through new technology like early feature phones, new peripherals like motion sensors, or even new ideas like with Monkey Ball Adventure. Despite the end quality of some of these products, it's pretty impressive for a series that was only 5 years old. And in the years following Banana Blitz, this momentum never stopped. In fact, throughout the next few years, 5 more games would be released on non-console platforms, mostly phones. And with their ever-increasing power, we're about to see even more interesting ideas see fruition than we could before. Before that though, let's take a look at our one flash game of the revision era. Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz Mini was, similar to its predecessors, a demo of its Wii counterpart. But how'd you make a good demo for a motion-controlled game on computers? Maybe you could use the mouse to tilt some stages again? Well, remember, the main focus of Banana Blitz was its mini-games. Naturally, they'd want to present these here instead. So what they decided to do was recreate Asteroid Crash and Fruit Basket for the mouse and keyboard respectively. And because these games were so simple to begin with, I have to admit that there's really nothing lost here. Hilariously enough, these versions might be better. As much as I can appreciate the Wiimote, there's no denying that pressing an arrow key is faster and more convenient than flicking your wrist. And using your mouse is going to be more comfortable than using pointer controls too. You could even argue that it isn't a good demo because of this. If anything, it shows exactly why they didn't need to come up with so many shallow uses for the Wiimote. Sure, you're losing some graphical fidelity by not playing the full version, but that's basically it. So while it isn't false advertising, it almost shows a spotlight on everything I was complaining about with the minigames. But enough about that, it's time to jump forward a few months. Back on J2ME platforms, Sega released Super Monkey Ball Tip and Tilt on January 30th, 2007. As you'd expect from a spin-off, this wasn't made in-house, but rather courtesy of Glue Mobile, an American developer. You probably haven't heard of them, as they mostly worked on the thankless job of mobile ports, but they've worked on many notable franchises over the years and even went on to acquire GameSpy Technologies, before being acquired themselves by EA. That being said, they're still around today, and even from this one game, it's clear to see that they've had some talented people on board. Just looking at this gameplay, you'll probably notice that we really jumped forward in quality. This is a fully featured game on a handheld. In fact, this is good enough that Sega could upscale the assets, say it was a pixel art aesthetic, and release it on modern phones. And here we were just 3 years ago playing a simplistic bowling game. Anyway, this is an expansion of the Seesaw Ball minigame from Banana Blitz. You know, I kinda expected them to give Dangerous Route the treatment instead, but I suppose they figured the screen was better suited here. Best to stick with a vertically oriented game for phones, I suppose. The concept is the same as before, only using the phone's buttons. Get the monkey from the top of the course to the goal as fast as possible, while collecting bananas along the way. Except where the base game only had 3 stages, this has 48. Again, that's quite the leap considering the platform. These stages are broken up into the 3 usual difficulties: Beginner, Advanced, and Expert, each having 8, 16, and 24 levels respectively. Technically, the game lists 42, but every 5 floors has a unique bonus stage that you can't access from practice mode, so I'm counting those toward the total. Sadly, there isn't a way to play every stage in the game in one shot, but at least unlocking the stages is fun. It's pretty simple. Each difficulty has its first stage unlocked from the start, and every stage thereafter unlocks the next when cleared outside of practice. In terms of modes, the 3 marathon-type modes are Normal, Challenge, and Time Attack. The last is pretty self-explanatory, just get to each goal as quickly as possible, regardless of bananas. And if you're the competitive type, there's even a multiplayer option for you. Normal and Challenge mode, however, are a little less distinguishable, so let's go over the common rules. You start off a session with 2 lives, and every 100 bananas nets you an extra. Plus, you have 4 continues, which means you really have 10. I actually don't know why they bothered though, because there are no extra levels and no general penalties besides resetting your score. Now, that isn't a bad incentive in itself, but you're probably wondering, what's the difference between Normal and Challenge mode then? Well, Normal lets you start off from any stage in a set and is for 1 player only. Meanwhile, Challenge allows up to 4 rotating players and always starts you on the first stage. As a result, I find the Normal mode to be somewhat redundant. Sure, you could probably just set a high score by skipping a stage you don't like, but that kinda seems to defeat the purpose of having a life system, and as a consequence, unlockable stages. It's not even that they're letting someone skip a stage they don't like, because you still have to finish it at least once in order to see what's next. Plus, what fun is a high score if you just skip half the content anyway? So in my opinion, Normal mode is little better than another practice mode. Just play Challenge mode on single player. Structural issues aside, the levels themselves are fun enough at least. All the concepts from Seesaw Ball return, including typical platforms that you control normally, green ones which move on a track, purple ones which simply respond to your ball's weight, and red ones that are controlled in groups. Even the goal itself can move now, while fans and bumpers can also be a hindrance. Overall, there's nothing groundbreaking here, but for what it aimed to do, it's quite good. Like I said, you could probably release this today with little issue. The art style and music are taken from Monkey Ball 2, sporting more realistic backgrounds and remixes of some old favorites. In fact, the lower quality can make a couple tracks sound punchier, like the Jungle Island theme or the World Select song from Story Mode. Overall, I wouldn't say this game is a must-play or anything, but if you're looking for a fun spin on the franchise, it's a nice package. And it seems Sega liked how it turned out too, because they released a sequel about a year later, this time made by Rockpool Games. Super Monkey Ball Tip and Tilt 2. Now, a little background on these guys. They were based in the UK and specialized in early mobile games, but they were eventually absorbed into Eidos. Get this though, the successor studio, Playdemic, was then bought by TT Games. They were then later sold to EA, joining Glue in its fate. On that note, let's see who did the concept better. The first thing you'll probably notice is the Banana Blitz aesthetic, which takes over the UI, backgrounds, and music. Even the monkeys got new sprites. It's a respectable effort, but I don't think the art style looks great at such a low resolution. That being said, I find it neat how the 3 worlds are deliberately ordered. You start off in space, then move on to the skies above a snowy mountain range, before finally going to Jungle Island, where those same mountains can be seen in the background. It gives a sense of continuity as you roll down these stages. Plus, there are some animations in the background this time. It's nothing too crazy, just some UFOs or some birds flying around, but even then, I don't think we've seen this type of bird before. So that means they designed a new race just for a small background element. That's the kind of attention to detail that I appreciate. The music isn't too bad either. I especially like how the Monkey Target song turned out. Sure, maybe a couple tracks are a little hard on the ears, but you're condensing a rock soundtrack to a 2007 phone's MIDI font, so I'm sure there's only so much you could do. Anyway, there's more setting these games apart than just graphics, because Tip and Tilt 2 gets a lot more experimental with its gimmicks. The primary one is flying. By grabbing enough bananas, you can fill up a gauge at the bottom of the screen. The fuller it is, the longer you can stay in the air until it gradually drains. I can see where they were going with this. It provides a bit of a handicap at the cost of your time, meaning you'll actually want to avoid using it too much when setting a high score. Plus, the connection to bananas restricts it from being too broken. That being said, the controls are a bit too difficult to use smoothly, and I found it more effective as a glide. Plus, since the game has a vertical orientation, it's a bit difficult to determine how high you should be trying to fly when you can't see the next platform. Nevertheless, it's a fun idea that unfortunately just didn't seem to work too well. That's not all though. Each world has its own unique elements. The space theme, known as Outer Orbit, introduces wormholes that teleport you to the next section. They usually use these when they want to break a stage into smaller segments, and they're honestly not a bad idea. You want the beginner stages to be easy, but not so mindless that you can just skip everything and land on the goal. That's still a possibility sometimes, but not as bad as it could be. In the next world, Dizzy Heights, the flying gimmick is put on center stage, often having wide spaces between clusters of platforms. Because of this, you need to make sure to collect enough bananas along the way, leading to a slightly slower experience. Finally comes Jungle Island, featuring the return of bumpers and the introduction of trampolines. We also see switches, swings, and crumbling platforms make an appearance. This is when Tip and Tilt 1 and 2 feel the most similar, and it's a decent challenge at times. In general, I find the levels to be fun enough, if a little less creative. Tip and Tilt 1 had only a couple gimmicks to work with, so you saw more unique ideas like keeping up with this moving platform. Though I will say, flying definitely makes the bonus stages more fun at times. Structurally, this game is a bit different, in my opinion, for the better. The three main modes return with an unlockable random mode, a shuffled 15-stage marathon for up to 4 players. Normal mode now gives you 10 levels per world to choose from, which can then be completed in any order. In fact, only 8 need to be finished for the next world to be unlocked. And as before, a bonus stage follows the 5th level. Of course, that means lives make a return here, and they're equally as unnecessary as before. So I'll spare you the tangent. But one thing they did remove was practice mode. It seems they also figured it was redundant. So now, normal mode is for setting individual high scores and unlocking new worlds. Time attack is for speedrunning levels, while challenge and random are for marathoning. But there's one more secret up this game's sleeve. After completing all 3 worlds, you unlock secret levels. There are 3 levels per world, with another bonus level to cap them off. Although considering these are the last stages you play, that makes running them in normal mode even more pointless. At least with challenge mode, they still contribute to your score, but it's still an odd inclusion. But speaking of challenge mode, it seems to be a little weird. It has an unlockable option to only play secret levels, but if you select a normal world and play it past stage 10, you play all 15 stages there anyway, and your score saves to the secret leaderboard. So that effectively means that if you play too well, you can't save a score on the world leaderboards. I suspect it was just a programming oversight, and you couldn't even upload these scores, but still, it's weird. But anyway, that's Tip and Tilt 2. What I find really interesting is that these 2 games have almost the exact same relationship with each other as SMB 1 and 2 on the GameCube. One doesn't introduce anything crazy, but has some really smart stage ideas and mostly consistent quality. 2 has more going on with the presentation and gimmicks, but the flight system is kinda iffy. As someone who likes novelty, I find 2 a bit more memorable, but find both games complement each other well, even if I prefer one's art style. With that, we've just about finished the early smartphone era. The only other feature phone-related content the Monkey Ball series would see was a Japanese exclusive port of Tip and Tilt to the Android in 2012. Titled Uki Uki Seesaw, it was exclusive to the Puyo Sega subscription service, which has been discontinued. Luckily, the same preservationist as before uploaded a video showing some gameplay, and it seems to have had no extra features, but it's yet another game to add to the lost media pile. Don't get too sad though, because we're now moving forward to the release of the iPhone 3G. For the past while, a Canadian studio named Other Ocean Interactive was hard at work trying to port Touch 'n Roll to the iPod. While these attempts were unsuccessful, this new iPhone and its development tools allowed this dream to become a reality. In fact, Sega of America, Other Ocean, and Apple closely collaborated to make sure this was one of the first apps ever shown to the world. Just watching the reveal presentation, you can really tell they were proud of their work. And who can blame them? These guys put together a demo for a completely new platform in just 2 weeks. Granted, I think the speaker got a little carried away with his enthusiasm, but still.
Now for me, I'm a hardcore gamer, so it was really tough for me to wrap my brain around the idea of not playing with analog sticks. But after 2 weeks with the iPhone, it's going to be very hard for me to go back and play this on a traditional game controller.
As I would later explain in a GDC presentation, most of them were already fans of Monkey Ball to begin with, and took feedback from Banana Blitz when designing the game. In fact, during the development process, they modeled and tested 150 stages, culling the 40 which they most felt didn't meet the series standard. And only a few months later, the app titled Super Monkey Ball launched alongside the iPhone 3G. Okay, before we go any further, can we just talk about that name for a second? I get it, they wanted it to be searchable, and it was the only one of its series on the App Store. But this situation is getting ridiculous. So from now on, I'll be referring to it as Monkey Ball iOS just to keep things clear. Anyway, let's take a look. The first thing you'll probably notice is that this is yet another leap forward in quality, this time featuring 3D graphics. In fact, the only reason the ball and monkeys were still touch and roll sprites was due to time limitations. The world itself is a pretty good recreation of Banana Blitz, albeit downscaled. According to the developers, they originally wanted to stick with the classic art style, but they were so surprised by the iPhone's power, they flew in an extra artist from their Canadian headquarters for the demo, before deciding to imitate the most recent entry. Nevertheless, it's a little funny to see touch and roll assets mixed with Wii environments, with some GameCube-era sound effects thrown in for good measure. Really, the only complaint I have here is that navigating a 2D sprite in a 3D space isn't quite as intuitive. And similarly to the previous handheld games, the engine itself seems to get confused at times. You aren't clipping through the edges of platforms like on the GBA, but it's still a small inconvenience. In terms of the content itself, the 110 stages they chose are definitely a relief after Banana Blitz. Though, to be fair, I think they were aiming for something slightly different this time. You see, the biggest limitation of this game is that it was still using Touch and Roll's engine as a base, but instead of using a D-pad or even the touchscreen, you're using tilt controls. And as a result, you're not going to have the same finesse as before. Plus, don't forget that this engine isn't very supportive of stunts or tricks, so instead, they advise you to go slower and more so focus on stationary obstacles. In fact, I think the most complex thing you face here is a cogwheel. Otherwise, it's mostly about weaving between uneven terrain, bumpers, walls, and rotating platforms. And you know what? I don't mind it too much. It's a more relaxed playstyle that nonetheless still feels great when you optimize a stage. I just wish I wasn't locked into tilting the phone. Sure, I can praise the content of the game all I want and appreciate how they adapted the playstyle, but that doesn't really change the fact that the controls just aren't that great here. First of all, tilting the phone forward and backward means you're obscuring your view of the game, especially if there's a source of glare, which is often the case with a phone. Second, the neutral position is about 45 degrees with the ground, and there's no way to adjust it. Combined with point 1, this means that the only reliable way I found to play the game is to lean forward over the screen. And trust me, that gets pretty uncomfortable even after just 10 minutes. And I can sympathize with the devs here. This was way before you could connect controllers to a phone, and virtual buttons wouldn't have been much better either. So in the end, they worked with what they had. But again, that doesn't change the fact that I'm massaging my neck after playing more than 2 rounds at a time. I mostly just wish they allowed us to set our own default position. I could totally see myself playing this while lying in bed. But maybe the thought has crossed your mind, Okay, maybe this game isn't that fun in long intervals, but what if I just have 5 minutes to play something on my phone? Maybe I'm standing in a line or waiting for the bus. And fair enough, most of my problems are alleviated here. So let's circle back to the content, because there's more than appears on the surface. Looking at the structure, there are 5 worlds, each with 2 levels marked as easy and hard. But the latter has to be unlocked by clearing the easy set. Simply clear a world to unlock the next. But with only 10 levels per set, that only makes 100 levels. Where are the others? Well, they're actually secrets relating to another central mechanic. You see, the way lives are implemented here makes them pretty meaningless. You start off with 5 and also get 5 continues. That makes 25 lives to get through 10 levels. On top of that, collecting 10 bananas nets you another. This was apparently a decision by Sega in an attempt to appeal to as wide of an audience as possible. But the devs realized that with this setup, bananas now held little to no value to the player. And in that case, it doesn't really matter if you place them in tricky spots because the player will realize the risk just isn't worth it. With the absence of secret goals on top of that, a lot of the appeal for mastering the stages and mechanics would be lost. Sure, you could reward the player for a perfect clear or for not using a continue, but that wouldn't really fix too much. So they came up with an entirely new idea to appeal to the hardcore fans. Each stage has 10 bananas scattered around, and collecting them all gives you a crown for that stage upon reaching the goal. If you crown all the stages in a set, the secret 11th level is unlocked. You can even crown the secret stages, though it doesn't give you anything. There's a catch though. You have to get all the bananas without falling out once. So that means if there's a stage with branching options and bananas scattered across them, you have to plan a route to get everything within the time limit. And once a stage is crowned, it persists across runs. So if you only mastered half the stages, it's no problem. Just get the others the next time you play that set. This would potentially be a fantastic solution, had it not been for one more condition. It's not enough to get all the bananas in one life, you have to get them in your first life. If you fail a stage, even once, you won't be able to earn that crown until your next run. You can still try to crown all the other ones, but that doesn't change the fact that it's super annoying. It wasn't enough to simply reset all the bananas? I would understand that. They didn't want you to simply get a banana, die, and then get the rest with no penalty. But forcing you to basically restart the entire game feels much closer to padding. And honestly, one stage isn't worth the headache. I guess you could say their heart was in the right place, but they just were too heavy-handed with the punishment. Anyway, are there any other modes for SMB iOS? Well, there are no party games, but there is an instant play option, similar to the random mode from Tip and Tilt 2. Basically, any stage you've unlocked will be thrown into a pool. Upon starting the mode, you're given a random character, 5 lives, and 5 continues before entering an endless stream of levels. I kinda see this as a score chaser mode, even if it doesn't have a leaderboard. It's fun to see how long you can last. Despite my problems with the controls, I enjoyed the content so much that I wanted to see how long I could go and ended up maxing out my score counter, one short of 1,000,000 points. Just as a frame of reference, I think that was about 5 or 6 hours across the sessions. I don't think the critics enjoyed the game as much as I did though. On release, this game got some pretty harsh reviews. Everyone seemed to agree that while the quantity and quality of the content was impressive, it didn't really matter if you couldn't reliably navigate it to begin with. IGN especially noted that the tilt controls of the iPhone just didn't have the precision to even match the Wiimote, giving the game a 4.5 out of 10. That's even lower than Adventure. Ouch. The feedback was so loud in fact that throughout the next couple months, the developers would release 2 patches, first making the dead zone less harsh, and later adding a guided tutorial and optional tilt meter. Speaking of the tutorial though, it's pretty good, first giving you a handheld guide through a stage before making you do it again without rails. Apparently this was something they wanted to implement from the start, but just couldn't finish in time. It's a shame too, because by the time it was released, the game's reputation was set in stone. They would even release a free demo and cut the price, but it didn't seem to help public opinion. There was something else these updates added though that I felt the need to mention. And no, it's not the link to more Sega games added in version 1.3. It was the ability to suspend your game. You see, a problem with the initial release was that if you exited the app at all, you'd have to restart from the beginning of the set. This was fixed so that upon reopening, the game will offer to restore your last session where you left off. But in addition to being convenient, this patch provided one of the biggest exploits I've ever seen. Remember how I complained about having to get all the bananas in a stage on your first try? Well, if you open a restored game, it will once again allow you to earn the crown, even with some of the bananas collected. This makes earning the extra stages trivial, and kinda ruins the point of the entire system, to be honest. That being said, I'll take it over having to restart the session every time. So at the end of the day, how did Monkey Ball iOS turn out? Well, I definitely call it another mixed bag. But it's not like Adventure or Banana Blitz, which tried something new and failed. I'd put it closer to Junior. Technically impressive? Absolutely. Content rich? Certainly. But fun to control? Not so much. I'm not one to question a hardcore gamer, but I think I'll find a traditional controller more than easy enough to go back to. Still, if you do give it a chance, there's a lot to like. Again, look at the stages. Sure, a good amount are remakes of classic ones. That definitely hurts the game's uniqueness. Plus, some of the stages have odd ordering. Why is an advanced stage in World 3, but a beginner stage in World 5? And worst of all, why are there 2 mazes here? And yet, what we have here is quite good overall. As funny as it is to see Ancient Wars and article comments, I can look past the legitimate issues to appreciate the passion the team had. And you know what? Despite the criticisms, the game did quite well at launch, selling 300,000 copies and accounting for 10% of all iPhone sales. It's hard to imagine today, but during this period of the late 2000s, Monkey Ball had cemented itself in the gaming landscape. So it probably wasn't too unexpected when, just a year later, Sega and Other Ocean would take another shot at the idea with Super Monkey Ball 2, or as I'll call it, Monkey Ball iOS 2. Strangely enough, there was basically no fanfare around this game. As far as I can tell, Sega just released a press statement one day that said a new Monkey Ball, made from the ground up, was now available on the App Store. This time, you can see they were able to emulate the Wii's graphics much closer. The menu itself has quite a few 3D elements, with the world select being a globe you spin. And of course, the ball is no longer a sprite like last time. That being said, there are definitely some scuff marks around the edges. Like, what are these character models? Not that you notice them during gameplay, but the select screen is kinda unpleasant to look at. Plus, quite a few tracks don't seem to be looped properly. It'll either end and start again, loop too early, or in Ultra Heaven's case, randomly skip backward 5 seconds and then forward again, like it's on a slightly scratched CD or something. Granted, these quirks aren't too hard to overlook in the grand scheme of things, but they are notable. I find it funny that when you pick a character, everyone just looks sad, like they have to sit in the corner knowing that they're missing out on near-death experiences. Speaking of those, this game has 5 more worlds with the same general system as before. The world themes are just the ones left over from Banana Blitz, but are still slightly remade. For example, Sinking Swamp has gone from brown to acid green for some reason. I guess I like it better? It's also got a ton of rotting trees and pumpkins, as if they're going for a daytime Halloween feel, so that's cool, I guess. Cobalt Caverns is more like Turquoise Caverns this time, but the other 3 are pretty faithful. The presentation wasn't the only thing recreated from Banana Blitz though. The physics system has seemingly been painstakingly recreated to act just like it too. As impressive as that is coming from Touch 'n Roll's engine, you might remember that I didn't really like Banana Blitz's system. It feels a little too floaty, and the ball definitely doesn't seem to have the same weight as in the originals. That's just one part of the equation though. They also took feedback about the controls in the first game, and I think they overcorrected. Now, it takes way more of a tilt to affect the stage like the first game. And once again, they didn't include any calibration options. These two factors combine in just the right fashion to tick me off. Stopping on a dime isn't nearly as easy as before, and moving forward is much slower. So it basically means everything you do feels slightly delayed. And just in case you forgot, the more you tilt, the more your viewing is restricted. I'm not gonna say you can't get used to this system, and sure, maybe I just needed time to adjust from the old controls, but it sure is frustrating when you fail to clip a corner and die 1 foot away from the goal with 10 bananas in tow. Well, are the stages any good at least? It's complicated, because they clearly took inspiration from Banana Blitz in this area too. It's better than the Wii game by a noticeable margin, but it's also worse than iOS 1 at the same time. The real problem is that the difficulty curve is way too slow. The first 3 worlds are pretty mindless, only having about 1 or 2 really interesting levels per set. In fact, I can't really recall many off the top of my head. Even comparing World 1 from each iOS game, it's clear that 2 prioritizes wider floors and less complex design. And in World 3, the opening floor is just a corridor with 2 turns. Even when it did something interesting, it just reminded me of a similar idea that a previous game did better, including its direct predecessor. Again, that's not to say there weren't any interesting concepts, but they were pretty rare. And then I hit Ultra Heaven and was immediately hit by a torrent of creativity. A stage where you choose between 3 different challenges, the top of a pipe split into bobbing sections, a series of bridges with flipping platforms. It was a breath of fresh air. Sure, maybe some concepts had been done before, but that didn't matter. Somehow, this game redeemed itself in the 11th hour. So you can see my conflict here. About 70% of the stages feel uninspired. My playthrough got pretty mindless at times. But that last 30%, those crown stages and Ultra Heaven, they almost made up for the rest. Oh, speaking of crowns, it's basically untouched from the last game, with the exception that the stage you unlock is selected separately from the rest of the set, maybe to make it easier to crown itself. Unfortunately though, they patched the glitch from before. The only way it can be exploited now is to close the app before you fall out, at which point it'll reset all the bananas. So, as you can imagine, doing things the intended way, constantly restarting level sets from the beginning, did not make me appreciate the basic stages anymore. But there is one more secret. Crowning all 110 stages unlocks an ultimate challenge. And it's not even a marathon mode like I expected. It's 5 more, decently challenging levels. Sadly, crowning all of them doesn't do anything, but still, that extra reward is very much appreciated and brings the grand stage total up to 115. So far, this game is looking decent. So is there anything outside of the main mode? Well, Instant Play returns, now rebranded as Quick Play with the same system as before. It's pretty crazy once you finish everything though. You can go straight from Jumble Jungle to a master stage. But that's not the main feature this time, at least in my opinion. That would go to multiplayer. And I'm not talking about the cheap version where you take turns passing the phone around. I'm talking fully simultaneous competitive multiplayer. The only requirements were that you and up to 3 other Monkey Ball fans could meet together IRL, have an iPhone, and purchase Monkey Ball iOS 2. Coincidentally, the way I got to test this feature was dual-wielding iPads, in a stunning battle between my left and right hand. And to be fair, the experience worked with little to no technical issues. Basically, when you join a lobby, everyone decides on any 5 of the 115 stages to play on, wherein everyone races to the finish and are scored based on their results. Whoever has the most points at the end of the game wins. This mode also adds incentive to play the single player too, as you can only vote for stages you've unlocked. Despite how niche this mode would inevitably be, I appreciate that the devs decide to include it anyway, especially since this was the first portable game with main mode multiplayer since Junior. So to wrap up the main game, I think it's good, though not quite as good as the first game. That's due to the first half having inferior level design, not really fixing many issues with the first game, and in the case of the physics, making them worse, at least in my opinion. I find it funny how a Sega rep actually confirmed that they want to more closely emulate Banana Blitz, so in that department, task failed successfully? It shows the difference between the devs and the publisher. There are also a few other interesting changes from the first game. For example, the game can now save replays, but ditches the leaderboard. But on the other hand, we have the inclusion of the 5 master stages and multiplayer. So I could definitely see an argument that this one is better. But if you think 115 stages with simultaneous multiplayer was all this app had to offer, you've underestimated Other Ocean. Because we also have 3 recreations of classic minigames too. So, even with my experience last time, let's briefly go over each one. Monkey Bowling, the only one to be included at launch, it's easily the most intuitive. Slide your finger along the bottom to choose a starting position, then flick in the desired angle to send your monkey rolling. To add a curve, just tilt the phone. There's no challenge mode, but it's serviceable for what it is. Monkey Golf. It's better than the Wii version, that's for sure. It's nice to be able to actually understand the controls. Actually, it reminds me a little of Touch and Roll. You set your aim, choose your club, and then slam this slider down and up to simulate your swing. The straighter your stroke, the less curve you'll add to the ball. The physics once again are from Banana Blitz, but at least the courses are new. At least from what I could tell. And there's a full 18-hole challenge included. This wasn't available at launch, but rather as a free update a couple months later. And although I could think of a couple minigames I'd prefer, they could also do worse. At least it wasn't Paper Sumo Fighters. Monkey Target, dropping in the same update as Golf, this probably could have been the only minigame and nobody would care. Now, don't get me wrong, it's just the Banana Blitz version, and with only 1 ball in each round, with only 3 lines of bananas too, that means one could reach the highest possible score without too much hassle. So it probably is the worst iteration so far, but still fun. Well, that wasn't nearly as bad as last time. Overall, could you go without these minigames? Definitely. Even the multiplayer they include is just the pass-around version. But if you're looking for a break from the main game, there's at least some fun to be had here. To be honest, during World 3, I was wondering if this was even the same team as the first game. How could the same people who took feedback from Banana Blitz basically go back and recreate a bunch of its problems? Well, I definitely lay part of the blame on Sega. Beyond its initial success, they basically said the first game exceeded any and all expectations. So no doubt they wanted this game to be even more in line with the best-selling game in the series. But I do think another factor is that a lot of the team was different, so it's just possible they weren't as familiar with the classic entries. Regardless, it's important to remember that the second half of the game, especially Ultra Heaven, is pretty solid. Add on the multiplayer and minigames, and this was far from a passionless project. I just think the main difference here is that one felt a lot more simple. It was born out of technical restraints and a team who was familiar with the franchise. Its reference material was the entire series. iOS 2 just seems to reference iOS 1 and Banana Blitz. And of course, I'm not at liberty to say how familiar the team was with the series. But it's a good reminder how complex the development process is. In terms of reviews though, this game did fare much better. IGN even gave it a 7.2. Again, I don't really get how everyone could say the controls were better, but to each their own. The real funny thing here is that they said that the previous game made you collect every banana in a stage? Did we play the same game? It's the exact same unlock system. Whatever, apparently 1 is worse than adventure, but 2 is better than touch and roll. Anyway, it's time to look at one more mobile game for now. Super Monkey Ball 2 Sakura Edition. Now, I'm sure some of you are scratching your heads. Is this an update for Monkey Ball 2? Why is this counted as a separate game? Because Sega said so. Okay, for full context, this was kind of a perfect coincidence. In the spring of 2010, Sega released a new Monkey Ball game for the Wii, which we'll be covering next. But around that same time, Apple released the iPad, featuring a bigger, better display and multi-touch. So just as they supported the iPhone's App Store launch, they also decided to support the iPad. And so they took iOS 2, spruced up the graphics, and added some extra content, including a 6th world sharing a theme with the console game. And this version, Sakura Edition, launched as an exclusive to iPad, though it would eventually be supported on other devices. Still, if these changelogs are accurate, Sega had guts. They released a base game, charged people again for the Sakura Edition 4 months later, then didn't even add the 2 other mini-games to the base version till almost 3 months after that. Well, let's see if the content on offer was worth double dipping for the now $13 price tag. I must say that the graphical improvements were not insignificant. This looks way better than the base version, especially with the redone animations. The menu looks a bit better too, though I don't know why they made the buttons so tiny this time. They also took the effort to change a background for the title and victory screens. In the case of the latter, it will now match the theme of the world you just cleared. But let's be real, we're here for the new content. And seeing as there's been no other changes to the main game, let's look at the new world, Far East. The good news is that it's unlocked from the start. The flip side is that the stages are all pretty easy unless you're looking to crown it. And even then, it's pretty pointless because it's only 10 levels long, with no crown level either. In terms of the level design itself, the first half is about as generic and uninteresting as Worlds 1 through 3. But the second half at least has some interesting ideas, like these separating rails, or this long runway. My biggest complaint is that despite originally being exclusive to iPad, this world seems to have some serious slowdown, particularly during the initial camera pan. And I suspect it's because there's just so much geometry between the elaborate background and the larger stages that it just has trouble loading everything in. The next thing the team added was a new minigame, Monkey Base. Exclusive to the iPad, even after the app was made more widely available, its focus is on simultaneous multiplayer, as opposed to the other ones. The best way I can describe it is multiplayer Breakout combined with Monkey Tower of all things. Everyone picks a banana on the 4 corners of the screen. Then first one, then several projectiles begin flying around the map. Intercept one to launch it across the screen at an opponent. The goal is to use these projectiles to carve out an opening in everyone's walls to destroy their bananas. If your banana is destroyed, you're out of the game and the last monkey standing wins the round. Win 3 rounds and you're declared the victor of the match. And yeah, I can definitely see why this would be exclusive to the iPad version. If you're setting this down on a table or something, it gives everyone a bit more room to breathe. Granted, it's still probably a little cramped for some people, but you can see they were thinking of ways to utilize the bigger screen. There's actually another mode the team added to the game though. Just in case local multiplayer wasn't impressive enough for you, they took the game online. After an update, this game utilized Apple's Game Center to let you play against friends or strangers around the world. It's the same rules as before, but with the addition of Far East. So you've got 125 levels to pick from. Honestly, I wasn't expecting this feature to work nowadays, but I tried it out with Goober13MD, and even if we had a fair number of roadblocks, we still got it to work. And as a feature exclusive to the Sakura Edition, you can't deny it's a pretty good selling point. There's one more thing about this game though. Since it's integrated with Game Center already, we also get achievements. Unfortunately, this part does seem to be completely broken, so I couldn't see all of them. But I'd occasionally get notified that I'd gone something, like after completing a world or finishing an online match. Anyway, it's pretty clear in my opinion that this is the definitive version of the game. Between the extra levels, monkey base, online play, and achievements, there's basically no reason to go back to the original. In fact, I'm sure if you bought the vanilla iOS 2, you'd feel pretty slighted. You'd essentially paid for a gimped version of the game. I would have almost rathered Sega not to release it at all. Just make Sakura Edition exclusive to the iPad's launch, and then roll it out to other devices later. That matter aside though, yeah, I definitely say this was a worthy sequel. Again, I have several problems, but at the end of the day, it's more than playable and has its place in the series. And really, that's what I can say about all the games we've covered here. I'm glad we took a look at these separately because I think there's a clear line between the fun novelties from the early 2000s games to those that actually resemble modern mobile gaming. Oh yeah, except Banana Blitz Mini, I guess. But now it's time to jump back to the Wii, because Sega was ready to release another mainline game. Would it be better than Banana Blitz though? That's the real question. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.